At some point, my wife was the one who said, you should go to these conferences that I hear about. That was a big step for me. Maybe some of you were at your very first conference, and I know that feeling of trepidation when you're going to go from that person who's just quietly writing at home, and it's between you and the words on the page. But now you're going to step out, and you're going to take that bold step, and you're going to wear it. You're going to own it and say, I'm a writer, damn it, and here I am. I know that feeling. And I did it with a certain amount of trepidation, but I tell you something, as soon as I got involved in it, I have to say, I knew that was a big step. And I embraced that writing community. I really enjoyed the opportunity to not only meet with other people who write for a living and do it well, but also people who were like me, were wanting to try and develop themselves as writers. And I recall one of the conferences I attended, again, one of those nuggets that just kind of come along once in a while. It was Andrew Gross, who is a thriller writer. He's written a number of books on his own. He's a bestseller, perennial bestseller in the New York Times, and he's also, he wrote a lot of books with a guy you might have heard of, James Patterson. So Andy knows his stuff. He's got bones. There's no doubt about it. And he was kind enough to read the first 10 pages of what at that point was a finished novel of 110,000 words. And he read the first 10 pages for me, and he was actually very kind. He put in the margins. He said, well, good, and this is nice, and he underlined a couple of phrases that he really liked. But on the 4th page he wrote, okay, now I'm bored. And Andy not only wrote that, but then he had the nerve and the chutzpah to come up and actually tell me. He sat me down, he said, dude, you can write, but quit all the meandering. Quit all the side story. Get to the point. He said, these 10 pages should be 5. And I listened to him, and of course, I tried to be polite, knowing how incredibly wrong he was, that there was nothing in my book that could possibly be cut. But it was interesting to me that I look back on Andy's advice. It's kind of like in a SWAT team. I make that comparison because when you're a SWAT member, you're used to the unvarnished truth. There's no time for worrying about people's feelings. When you're on a SWAT mission, you're in SWAT training, SWAT cops communicate really clearly. Well, that's kind of like the treatment I got from Andy. And it was hard to accept, but once I did, and once I listened to the man, I tell you what, I went at it with a cleaver. Not with a scalpel, with a cleaver. And it was amazing how quickly those pages just faded away. It was amazing how quickly I took that 10-page prologue, but I'm embarrassed to say it. Folks, there's no such thing as a good 10-page prologue. And I cut it down to 5 pages, and it was incredible how inarguably better that opening scene now is, because I went at it. And not only did I do the first 10 pages, but I took that 110,000 word novel, which by the way is an unmanageable debut novel, and I cut it down to 92,000 words. At this point, I thought we were getting close, or I thought I was getting close. I had what was a 92,000 word finished novel. I was going to conferences. I was working pretty much every day, which is one of the basic rules. You pretty much have to write every day. And I ended up querying Jill Maher. But I kind of pulled a fast one, and I'll share this with you. I knew Jill was going to be at a conference 7 weeks down the road. So when I queried her, I just introduced myself. And I let her know that I had a novel that I was interested in sharing with her, but that she would be seeing me on her read and critique list. So just to keep her eyes open for it, and I look forward to meeting her at the conference. All I was trying to do, it was kind of a strategy, is to take myself, I hear them call it the slush pile, is I knew I was going to still be in the slush pile, but maybe I could just move over to the edge of it. And maybe I could just kind of put myself in a category of, not necessarily one, but maybe a smaller category than I knew all the people that Jill Maher was going to work with. Well, it worked. When Jill and I met, we clearly had a little bit of a chemistry. She had read my first 10 pages. She enjoyed it. This was after the editing. And she asked for the entire manuscript. And you all know what a big break that is when you get them to take your entire manuscript. So she took it, and it was a while, but her eventual feedback was, this could use some work. Now, that's not a touchdown, but that's a hell of a lot better than no thank you, or I'm not interested. When she said this could use some work, I said that's certainly something I'd be willing to do. And Jill was kind enough to mentor me. She didn't sign me. She didn't sign me as an agent. We didn't have a relationship for quite some time. But she took my manuscript and she handed it out to her beta readers, to her group of readers. And they gave me feedback. And it was really good feedback on things like point of view and character development and pacing and things that it was nice to see a reader who doesn't know me at all give me feedback on those sorts of things. I think at this point, Jill and I, eventually we solidified our relationship after a lot of back and forth, and she accepted me as a client. And of course, then I'm right there. So are we there yet? Are we there yet? Do we send it out? Are we there yet? And the answer was no, we're not. And we had a long discussion, and she left it up to me, but she said, this could really use maybe a freelance. So I did my research and I sent it out to a freelance editor. I did a lot of research, and I picked a woman named Emily Heckman. She's out of Santa Barbara. And I tell you folks, it was just more tough love. She sent it back, and she had some and she was 30 years in the New York City editing publishing world. And she said she talked about motivation, she talked about subplots, she talked about tightening the story. But what she said that nearly broke my heart was, I think it needs just a little bit more time on the shelf, which means we weren't there yet. And I got to tell you, at this point, I thought seriously about the idea of self-publishing. But I just knew that even with a background in police work, the very crowded and very competitive world of crime fiction just didn't treat very friendly people who self-published. So I took it back again, and I reworked it. I went over it pretty hard, and eventually I brought it back to Jill with some of the changes. And I brought it to Jill, and I said, Jill, this is it. This is benefit of the doubt. It's a 92,000 word kick-ass crime novel, and it's ready. She read it, and she agreed. And she took it to market. And in less than 30 days, she sold it in a 2-book deal to Macmillan with a very nice advance. So I have to tell you that everything that led up to that event was absolutely part of the requirement. There was nothing in there that I could have gotten around. There were no shortcuts. It was about a 5-year process from the time I said I think I could write a book until the time that it was sold to Macmillan. It was published earlier this year. It was selected as a buzz book for Publishers Weekly. It was on the LA Times bestseller list. It won the San Diego Book Awards. The reviews have been very good. But again, I just would say that this was the kind of the painstaking approach that we took to the publishing, and to wind up in a situation where you had a book that was that well received. The publisher sent me on a West Coast tour of Portland and LA and San Francisco and Scottsdale and back to Wisconsin, where the story is set, for several dates back there. It's been very gratifying. But I have to say that educational process, that was on-the-job training. And I don't think there's any way around it, folks. I don't think you can get around it. And I got to tell you that it paid off, because when it came time to write book number 2, I wouldn't say that it just fell into place, but the drive was much more pleasant. And I knew where to stop, and I knew who to ask, and I knew what references that I could use to take the best route to find that very elusive destination. And for that reason, I think it went a lot smoother, and the book Voice from the Field will be published in February of next year.